The old patterns are breaking up. It appears that men and women are at last willing to be honest with each other.
And that's partly, I suppose, because people are much more realistic, and more women now, as they have means for economic support, are leaving marriages.
If she becomes financially independent, will she leave? Will my shirts never be ironed again? You know, who's going to take care of the house? How is life going to look like around here at the most mundane level?
Courtship and pairing and living together and marriage is often seen as temporary mate selection. Rather than solve problems, trade it in. Get another model.
They expect perhaps to have an egalitarian marriage. They expect that dream to come true because the women's movement has said it's there, forgetting to begin with that egalitarian marriage is still being written up in newspapers and magazine articles because it's newsworthy, and it's newsworthy because it's rare.
You have been listening to the voices of people who have devoted their professional lives to the investigation of these problems between the sexes.
This program will look at contemporary barriers to understanding between women and men and ways to build bridges between them. I'm Betsy Erkola. I'm a professor of film and literature at California State University at Chico.
And I'm Larry Stupnagel, a television reporter. And as a married couple, Betsy and I are concerned that 1 out of 3 marriages will end in divorce. And since 96% of you watching this program will marry, you may be able to put to use the communication skills demonstrated in this program.
Many of us are breaking out of traditional patterns, but in this time of transition, the old expectations about female-male relationships cause confusion and conflict. Stereotyped sex roles are the main problem, according to Dr. Warren Farrell.
And we find that living together is very minimally different than people who are married. And I think it's sort of proof of what we should have known all along, which is that you take two people who have learned to communicate differently. And when I say learn to communicate differently, remember, we're calling the sexes the opposite sexes. We are saying that we are training people, in my opinion, for divorce training. That is, we're training women to communicate in an opposite way from men, to, in a sense, communicate in a way that makes themselves attractive to men by being as opposite men as they can be. And we're asking men to be attracted to women, attractive to women by being as opposite women as they can be. And we even call them the opposite sexes. Then we say things like opposites attract. And, you know, opposites do attract, but they just can't live together. And they can't live together very effectively, whether it's in a marriage situation or whether it's in a communal situation or an extended family.
As Dr. Lillian Rubin describes it, men and women speak different languages.
One of the problems between men and women is that, in fact, because of early socialization processes, because of the structure of the family, in which, in order to make an appropriate gender identification, men must shut off that first and most important primary relationship with a mother, which means shutting off a very important part of themselves, ultimately, in order to make that shift to male gender identity. For all of those reasons, what happens is that men become very closed off, too often, to the emotional parts of themselves. Women, on the other hand, who need not make that shift, and who in addition are socialized to attend always to the emotional aspects of any social situation. I mean, they're like radar equipment, honing in onto the emotional side of things. What happens then is you find a woman dealing at that level always, and men dealing at some rational level always, cutting off the emotional side, not giving it any credibility or credence, so that what happens is that you have this kind of paradigm of interaction with this rational man and this, quote, hysterical woman. She constantly wanting to deal with the emotional side of life and the emotional side of the interaction.
Why don't you ever talk to me?
I am talking to you. I don't know what you want.
You know, and it's true, he is talking, but he's saying words. He's not talking about what he feels like. He's not responding to the emotional content of the relationship. And the result is that there is no language with which to cross that barrier often. I think we need to find some new ways, obviously, of training boys and girls, and also some new ways in the family so that these patterns aren't perpetuated by the nature of the roles in the family.
Dr. Jessie Bernard gives another example of how differently girls and boys are socialized.
Then this beautiful example that Friedman gives of some experiments they did at Chicago. They picked out a team of girls who were very, very good at dodgeball. They selected the girls who could win, and they had a team of very winning dodgeball players, and they took a team of boys who were very poor at dodgeball, and they made a team of very poor dodgeball players. And do you know the girls let them win? They couldn't, couldn't be so mean as to defeat the poor boys.
The result is
the traditional male-female relationship dynamically creates rage in the woman because she's played the passive submissive role, and guilt in the male because he feels responsible.
Part of the difference in the socialization process is that girls learn from the media and other sources to emphasize romantic love, culminating in a glamorous wedding ceremony. But the movies and magazine stories usually don't include the communication or self-reliance skills necessary for an ongoing relationship. Clinical psychologist Dr. Rosalie Chapman explains the origin of the desire for romantic love.
I think that most people grow up with serious myths about what romantic love is and what love is in a relationship. And I learned about love initially from the way I am or am not loved by other people. And for whatever I miss out on, I fill in the gaps with my fantasies and what seems to be an ideal. And then I enter, as an adult, significant relationships with other adults, and I already have these expectations by the time I get there, and that sometimes makes things difficult. And I need to check out what are the discrepancies between my expectations, which I often don't even know where they came from, and what is actually happening with that other person's behavior.
Television soap operas, sitcoms, pop songs, and novels have helped to perpetuate the notion of romance as causing lovers to be starry-eyed and hear bells ringing. In fact, according to one study, romantic love is impossible to sustain over 90 days.
There's a whole great big industry nowadays of writing these romantic novels, and women are supposed to eat them up particularly.
The psychological mechanism of romantic love is based on projection onto the other, often of one's own undeveloped traits. I'm weak and you're strong, or I'm logical and you are emotionally expressive. Projection uses the other person as a movie screen for one's own unconscious material and prevents real knowledge of the other. Dr. June Singer tells how Carl Jung accounts for romantic love.
Jung would say that we're not really falling in love with the person across the crowded room, but we're finding that our inner image of a person with whom we would like to have a love relationship, perhaps an image of the kind of person we ourselves would like to be if only we were of the opposite sex, that image suddenly merges with somebody who seems to resemble it in some way. And then we project our image onto that person who resembles it enough. That person provides, we might say, a hook for our projections, and that person becomes terribly desirable. Romantic love is important, and we're never going to give it up, because without that, we wouldn't be attracted to people in the way that we are. Without the projecting quality of the psyche, all our relationships would be based on something cold and rational. We would even allow our parents to pick out our mates, because after all, our parents would judge their economic status and all those very important factors that are necessary to make a satisfactory marriage. The pleasure and excitement and the dynamics of interpersonal relationships as they occur in a truly exciting and fascinating relationship is something I'm sure we all would miss.
The problems created by romantic love mythology are pervasive, as Warren Farrell and Herb Goldberg explain.
I think romantic love in its present form leads to both the oppression of women and men. It leads to the oppression of men because it leads women into being seductive, into being manipulative, into being indirect. Women have to be indirect in the present society because they're not allowed to be direct.
I think romantic love is destructive mainly because people marry on the basis of it and have children on the basis. If they would just enjoy each other and let it and do it like a high, get stoned on it and then come down like you do from champagne or grass or something, that would be lovely because it's a wonderful experience even though it's unreal. The unfortunate thing is that we've made it real. We've given it a reality that it doesn't have, and then the Sandra and Daryl Bem have pointed out in their work on androgyny that feminine women are poor mothers, and macho men, as they get older, are very neurotic. These are the romantic couple are immature parents, and I think that they will create problem children because they can't. The feminine woman is too narcissistic to give very much. She's a child, and the macho male is so performance-oriented that he can't either give very much to his children. So you get a messy situation.
Radical feminists like Shulamith Firestone, author of The Dialectics of Sex, maintain that romantic love is the main tool used to oppress women, to keep them pouring their energies into men while men create culture. Dr. Eileen Skolnick elaborates.
Now, there are feminists who talk about love in general being women's special burden and being part of women's difficulties and inequality in the sense that they are supposed to be nurturant and loving and sort of to make up for the lack of this quality in men, that women specialize in this, which puts a certain burden on them. And therefore it gets men off the hook. It means, for example, that men have to be not considered responsible for children, that men can be excluded from the care of children because they are not naturally loving, nurturing people. And women are naturally nurturing people. And this whole love thing, in that general kind of sense, has all these ramifications in that women are supposed to do volunteer work, to take care of the sick in hospitals and so on. And if they're teachers, traditionally they haven't been supposed to be very interested in making money because they're nurturing people who like to take care of children and so on. So it's been used to reinforce inequality because women are supposed to be naturally loving.
As Dr. Warren Farrell noted, we train the sexes to be opposites. Men are not imbued with the same expectations that romantic love will provide the focal point of their life. The double standard manifests itself in sexual problems. Relationships in the bedroom and the living room influence each other, as Thea Lowry has seen in her work counseling couples.
Sexual disappointments are the basis for a number of divisions and communication problems. Now, sexual things can either be the cause or the effect of relationship difficulties. Visualize, if you will, a two-room place where a couple lives when they first start out. Here's the bedroom, here's the rest of the house. Now, they get together, things are absolutely super, Their physical compatibility is wonderful. The things that happen in the bedroom surround it with a golden glow, purple, aura, pulse, pulse, pulse. But through that door and in the next room, there are some misunderstandings from the family of origin or something about who washes the dishes, who cooks the meals, or where they store breakfast cereals, or who writes the bills, or how much money goes on the checks, or how much long-distance phone is okay, or what TV channel is okay to watch on Monday. Okay, so in this room over here, big turmoil, and that turmoil leaks through the door, and the aura dies in the bedroom because of the resentments. So disappointments in the relationship side cancel out nice things in the bedroom. That's one scenario. Okay, another scenario. What happens over here is wonderful. They both wash the dishes together and they chit-chat and they take turns cooking meals and they both put the Wheaties on the top shelf and they both agree that one of the ways of staying in touch is to make all the long-distance phone calls they want, and they just love it. And they both watch Monday Night Football, and everything is fine in that room. It has a golden aura, or pulse, pulse. But over in this other room, they get into bed, and every single time they make love, premature ejaculation, or non-responsive woman, or no erection when an erection would be appropriate, or a recoiling and aversive withdrawal because of vaginismus, or aversion on the part of the woman, or something else goes wrong. And so the disappointments that happen in this room leak out of the door and start canceling out the golden aura in the other room. So it can be either or to make a relationship get off the track. When there's a sexual disappointment, it begins to be the non-memory of shared good times, and it loosens the pair bond. Masters and Johnson said that those shared good times have something to do with the glue that keep people together.
I would say that secondary to communication problems, myths and misinformation are very central in people that are having sexual problems, and everybody has them.
What are some of them?
Well, one male myth is that men are ready for sex on a moment's notice, that women should not express an interest in a man sexually, that she should wait to be approached, that men have stronger orgasms than women, things like this.
What about women's myths?
Well, women are supposed to be ladylike, to not show their sexual feelings, and especially not to take initiative in a sexual situation with men. And the whole mythology around sex and love being of necessity related to each other, that a woman isn't supposed to enjoy sex unless she's in love with the person or married to them. And I've talked to several women who have gotten married to men that they have had sex with just because they had gone ahead and had sex.
And then it goes without saying that making a dive for the target zones has never been popular with women, that the overworked word foreplay is an honorable activity, but it needs to be thought of in a new way. And that is that it is an end in itself rather than something mechanical to be got through in order to get to the main event.
In general, I would say women's difficulties tend to center around a lack of being in touch with her own sexuality. And this can be a lack of physical responsiveness or awareness. It can be a lack of experience. It can be some real deficits in the woman's ability to perceive herself as a sexual person, and a lot of taboos and inhibitions, restraints around this. And I would say that would generally be a predominant pattern that we see in women.
One deficit in female sexuality is that girls aren't even given a word for their main organ of sexual pleasure, the clitoris.
A non-orgasmic response, either of the primary sort, situation of a woman who has never experienced an orgasm, or secondary non-orgasmic response, the situation of a woman who used to be able to or does not respond in the way she would like to. That is one of the conflict areas in sex. Pain with intercourse, involuntary spasm of the vaginal muscles prohibiting intercourse. I think those are the main things that are troublesome for women, and the things which are troublesome for husbands who consult me are impotence, the inability to obtain or maintain erection, premature ejaculation, which is having a climax before it would be helpful for the partnership. Men have pain, men have sexual aversion, and men have difficulties in ejaculating. So those are the major things that have a label that I see couples for. But when we come down to discuss what lies behind those sexual issues, it's usually relationship issues, communication problems.
Even such a simple thing as touching is feminine. Amazing as it is, we teach little boys that the desire to be stroked and hugged and kissed is for little girls. Most grown men are very uncomfortable with being touched. Many men don't get touched, except maybe in a perfunctory way leading to sex. If Macho could figure out how to have sex without touching, he'd probably do that too.
We've seen that the different socialization of men and women creates difficulties in lovemaking. We'll look now at solutions offered by counselors. Tom and Thea Lowry provide sex and family therapy. They are married and describe theirs as an egalitarian partnership. They believe that honest communication is vital.
Every person has a secret or private covenant of expressed or unexpressed or conscious or unconscious ideas about his or her, one, responsibilities within a relationship, and two, benefits of the relationship in general and the partner in particular. Expectations, plans, ideas, beliefs, fears you have, but you conceal or you hesitate to mention. The book called Pairing by George Bach. The first half of the book mentions lots and lots of things about how when we are in a courtship, we tend to put the best foot forward. We tend to conceal our flaws. We tend to wish to reveal ourselves as very like the person we're trying to bond with. This is you're laying the groundwork for disaster if you conceal what's really true about yourself.
Another difficulty surfaces when people expect their partners to make up for their deficiencies. Dr. Tom Lowry gives an example.
One of the very common marriages is he marries her because she is exciting and lively and bubbly and full of ideas. That's why he marries her, and she marries him because he is a good prospect. You know, he's not going to cheat or run around or drink, and he has a goal in life. And when they come for marriage counseling 10 years later, his complaint about her is that she's hysterical, emotional, empty-headed, doesn't write on the stubs in the checkbook, loses everything, can't be trusted with money, given to vapors and hysterics. And she says about him that he's dull and predictable, and he never has any ideas, he never wants to go out. And they're simply extrapolations forward in time of the things they picked each other for in courtship. And in marriage counseling, one of the jobs is to use the differences to build on rather than to divide people. Because I think it's helpful in marriage for people to complement each other, to fill in each other, because she really does fulfill a need, because she brings life and color and texture into their marriage. And he fulfills a need, which is stability and reliability. But if they can see these two factors as things to join rather than have as competitive or conflictual. But when they first come to counseling, they usually define them as irreconcilable differences. And the counselor's job is to see if there's some way to redefine them.
Now, effective modes of communication between people are clear, honest disclosures, my disclosure of my feelings and needs. Active listening to his feelings and needs. Active listening means really hearing what he's saying, not interrupting, not defining his reality, not saying, no, that's not what you really mean. I know what your needs are, and I also know what your feelings are. That wouldn't be active listening. Active listening is really being his mirror and saying back to him what he said to me. My trust and respect for his needs and feelings. I don't have to agree with them, but they're his and they're okay. You don't have to defend your feelings, they're facts.
People are asked to avoid 4 different kinds of communication, which are tied into specific words, which are the words we, you, let's, and why. And it sounds terribly simple, and yet they can hardly ever do it, because the habit patterns that people have are deeply ingrained. And what makes it more invidious is that they're usually disguised as good manners. In most high school English classes or business English courses, you're taught not to start a paragraph or a letter with the pronoun I. Somehow, at least that's what they were teaching when I was in school. It's supposed to be immodest. But it also says, who's talking? Or if someone thinks it's more polite to say, let's go on a diet. There's an agenda in there someplace, not very deep.
We should learn to skydive.
You always make me angry.
Let's visit my parents.
Why aren't you more affectionate?
Other kinds of why are really demands for justification. If you go into the children and say, why don't you clean up your room? You're not usually looking for an actual answer. Because if the children answered you honestly, they say, because I like to live in filth. So things starting with why usually are not very helpful. The other word is let's, and let's is usually a false mutuality. Let's go see another Clint Eastwood movie. I may want to do it, and I want her to agree to it, but it's a false mutuality. Okay, another one is a question, statement starting with you. And the word you is a great deal of the time followed by one of 2 other words, either always or never. You know, you always forget our anniversary. You know, you never put the cap on the toothpaste. You never hang the towel up straight, and this kind of thing. And I talked a bit about we, because the we is also a false mutuality, or can be. If a couple comes in to see me and they begin by saying, one of them starts by saying, we don't have any communication problems in our marriage. The first thing I think of is that, yes, they do. Because the speaker is speaking for both of them. So in the kind of counseling we do, one of the first things I may say to people is, in your talking together in the near future, I suggest that the 2 of you avoid these 4 words.
Here is an example of a couple learning how to communicate more effectively as they work with their counselors.
Are you willing to do that?
Well, you know, I need more clarity, because if I say to you, I don't feel like I can trust you, that's a you message as far as you're concerned, right?
Right.
And then, but if I feel like that, why isn't that a I message? I mean, that was our problem on Saturday night.
Right. You know, what it boils down to, you saying to me is, I feel you are blah, blah, blah.
Untrustworthy?
Untrustworthy. I feel you are unreliable. I feel you are undependable. I feel, you know, I don't know what your emotional state is. Are you angry? Are you disappointed? Are you furious? Are you sad? Are you crying? I don't know what your emotional state is. I have no idea. I know what I'm being accused of. I have a real clear idea what I'm being accused of.
Well, it would be very helpful to me then if you would say, well, how do you feel about that? I understand that you feel like you can't depend on me, but how does that make you feel? That would help me out maybe if you asked those kind of questions.
In terms of us entering into a contract or trying to create a model for interacting better when we're angry with each other, I would like not to have that left on my shoulders. I would like us to each assume the responsibility for conveying and relaying clearly and directly to the other each of our own emotional state, and not have me get yours out of you. Possibly, my fear is, possibly, while you're sniping at me, I feel you're unreliable, I feel you're untrustworthy, and I'm supposed to give you my feeling and drag your feeling out of you. That I don't want to have to do as a regular course of behavior. And I would like our model to be, you tell me you're feeling, angry, sad, frustrated, whatever, and I tell you my feeling, and we go from there.
As an example, if she were to say something like, Les, it really scares me. I'm feeling afraid right now because I don't feel like I can trust you. Is that
I'm
more...
feeling anxious because I don't feel I can trust you. Right, anything like that. You know, it gives me a bridge to walk across.
Eileen Dillon is a family counselor who has defined what she calls rules of assertive intimacy for couples who are ready to make commitments to a relationship.
Make a commitment to work feelings out to the end.
Now, many times you'll be in an argument with a person you're in a relationship with, and you can't take it anymore. They may be screaming names or obscenities at you, and you can't really stand it, or you've had enough, and you want to leave, right? Well, now, in the way it happens in a manipulative relationship is wonderful. You're going to leave, right? You're going to leave. The other person says, "Go ahead, leave then. See if I care." Then you get to the door, and they say, "Running away again, are you? You always run away." You know how that goes? Only in manipulative relationships. When you're in an assertive relationship, you recognize that the other person may need to leave, but you have a contract with that person that in a long-term intimate relationship, you know that they will at some point come back and finish the feelings with you to your satisfaction, okay?
Make a commitment not to compromise who you really are.
Because what happens if I start compromising who I really am, and this means that I have to know who I really am too. If I start compromising who I really am, I begin to resent you because I've given up parts of myself that are important to me, and I feel like you did it to me. You didn't. I did it to myself, but I did it in order to keep you.
Do not try to rescue your partner from pain.
It's my understanding that pain is the feedback we get from the world that helps us to grow. And if I try to rescue my husband or my child, the person that I love, from their pain, then I'm treating them as if they can't handle what comes up in their own life. I'm treating them like an infant, and I'm depriving them of whatever learning that they're trying to do in their own life.
Do not give help unless it's asked for.
Because my experience is that if a person hasn't asked for help with something, they'll sidetrack it. They won't get down to it.
Allow for differences.
Because the other person is not the same as you, they won't always do things the same way you would want to do them.
Recognize that your partner's anger says more about how your partner feels than it does about your behavior.
If I get angry with you for doing something, that tells you more about who I am than who you are. It tells you what my internal logic is that's getting violated. It doesn't say that you're being a terrible person, okay? And very often in relationships, if somebody makes a demand or offers a perspective, somebody will say, well, they're telling me that such and so is wrong with me. They're not really. They're telling you about themselves.
Make a commitment to be the most complete person you can be in this relationship.
You make a commitment when you're in a relationship to work on being the most complete, the most whole, the most compassionate. In other words, being your total self, being the person you came here to be is what you have to make a commitment to do. Look, no matter, I'm going to be in this relationship, and I'm going to be the most complete person that I can be in this relationship, and every opportunity there is for me to grow and get better, I'm going to take it, and you can count on me for that.
Most of us have had more than one love relationship, which means we go through a breakup. Counselor Iselina Ricci has found that there are common stages we experience. Some people get stuck in the anger stage.
And if we get stuck in that strong feeling stage, then we're going to remain attached to this old relationship in a way that may not be good for us. Now, when people get stuck in this off-the-wall stage, I call them junkies. There's a way of getting stuck. There's different kinds of ways to be a junkie, of course. But often, the way it seems to happen is that people, when they're in that process of asking, who am I without this other person in my life, they find that that emptiness is just too much to bear. And that when they can be angry at that other person, it fills up the void with these strong feelings, and you feel so righteous and you're so sure that this person is terrible, and it makes everything so clear. Well, it's a rush. And you can get hooked on those strong feelings and that sense of power in the same way as one can get hooked on some kind of a drug or on some kind of way to keep from facing something. Most people get into kind of a junkie status for a while if they've had a long-term relationship. It's not a terrible disgrace. The place where it becomes really damaging is if that becomes one's identity, if this is the expectation that you have in terms of what the rest of your life is going to be like.
When a relationship survives, a goal for many of us is that it be egalitarian, with shared roles not determined by gender. Both men and women stand to benefit.
At this point, I think one of the best things that happened to men, if they could accept it, would be feminism. If they could expect equal responsibility for equal privilege from the woman and no longer court her or no longer take responsibility for paying her bills and feeling guilty when things go wrong, that in itself is a tremendous boon.
I would hope that men become more active in the struggle. That is, that they're not simply responding to women's initiative and to women's sort of pushing at them and demands. Because in fact, if men were real participants in the struggle for change and meant to make the kind of change that women are demanding, they would find that their lives are being enriched by new kinds of relationships with their children, a different kind of relationship to their work, and a lifting of some of the oppressive burdens that men live under now with the mandate that they be fully responsible for the financial support of a family, not only while they're alive, but in case they should die.
And we're only now beginning to find out how many of them don't, how many welcome a woman who is not subordinate, who doesn't throw the whole burden on him. It is throwing a great heavy burden on men to require them always to play out that role. So I think we have to explore an awful lot of angles. What has happened is we got hung up in our stereotypes, and that gets in the way of really seeing what's happening and what's going on. All of these men who hated that having all this dumped on them, but there was no way for them to break out of it.
The ideal is egalitarianism, but the reality of our economic system makes it difficult to achieve.
And those are idle words if we talk about those things outside of the structure of the economy and the structure of the workforce. So it may be possible for some very privileged professionals to share a job or work half-time, but it's impossible for most people. A man on the assembly line or in a factory works the hours he's told to work. He has no choice, and his wife has no choice about it either. And so I don't like to offer solutions because I think they come as cheap shots unless you begin to look at what it would require. And what I'm saying is really quite revolutionary in the sense that it would require a revolution of the economy and the structure of the workforce. And I don't foresee it in, at least in my lifetime.
I do see changes, but I see them in a very limited social sphere. What happens is that instead of a one-on-one, you have a 1.5. In an egalitarian marriage, usually a woman has a role and a half, and he has just one. That's another thing we have to work out. What are the mechanics? I mean, even I think the idea of an egalitarian marriage is spreading.
And parenthood adds to women's work. Studies show that most working wives still do the majority of the housework and have less leisure time than their husbands. This is true cross-culturally. Sociologist Dr. Nancy Chodorow observes.
What happens is that because of income inequality between men and women, couples have to choose to put primary emphasis on the man's career, and so the woman is more likely to have to take a part-time job, work nearer to home, stay out when the child's ill. They can't afford not to, since she earns so much less than he does.
So children also present challenges in shaping an egalitarian marriage. Dr. Joanne Nicola did a study of professors who were couples. She found that
about 7% of the women felt that they had an equal relationship immediately after the child was born, and that they had to insist on an egalitarian relationship. One woman said that, you know, I expected everything to be equal, but I really didn't act like an equal. And unless she really acted like an equal and thought that her career was as important as his career and demanded, she said now in the new relationship that she was in, that she really acted like an equal and expected her husband to share in household chores and share in child care chores. And she was much more open to talking all these things out. Several of the women mentioned that the whole women's rights movement had given them a right to have these feelings. They kind of, these feelings were in the back of their minds before, but they never thought they had a right to speak their feelings in terms of being egalitarian.
But if we had a 6-hour workday, you'd have men and women working 6 hours a day, and even if we had child care facilities, good child care facilities in the factories like they do in Denmark and Sweden, which would alleviate some real issues for families. On the other hand, I'm not at all sure that would shift very much when the day is done and husband and wife come home, whether there would then be a really shared responsibility around what needs to be done in the house, what needs to be done for the children. I mean, as long as women are the ones who are even attuned to knowing what needs to be done, as long as a woman who has to be saying to her husband, would you please scrub the sink, it's dirty, would you please change the baby's diaper, then she's bearing the major burden. And the reality of the issues between the sexes now is that, in fact, men don't see those things. And it's true, we can label that as a political issue, and it is a political issue, but nevertheless, they don't see. And that is a reality.
If you have all the eggs and all the toast and all the jam and all the coffee and everything ready, and all you have to do is turn the toaster on and the coffee maker on and throw the eggs in the oven, okay, that's not so hard. But seeing that there are eggs there and that everybody knows what has to be done, the responsibility is what has to be shared.
Well, in my house, I cook 3 days a week, and Brian cooks 3 days a week, and 1 day a week is up for grabs, and everybody cooks for themselves. And he does the laundry, and we had to make contracts or covenants. We have a 3-page thing attached to the wall in the hallway at home. You know, who takes kids to the doctor, and who makes the appointments, and who takes care of the animals, and what day are you on, and what day are you off. Because everything was new. There wasn't anything that you could rely on and what was supposed to happen.
Dr. June Singer describes the relationship of the future as androgynous, where each individual utilizes the traditional strengths of each sex, such as assertiveness and confidence, and sensitivity and emotional literacy.
Sometimes people ask me, how do we become androgynous? The answer to this question is that we don't become androgynous. We already are. It's just necessary to let ourselves be ourselves. It's not necessary to learn how. This may sound like the easiest thing in the world, but for a society that has become expert at manipulating and forcing and conditioning people to function in an adaptive way, in a world that appears to require adaptation, we may have to unlearn a great deal in the process of becoming androgynous.
So we have seen and heard about sources of expectations which lead to disappointments in relationships between men and women.
But we've also seen that people are finding solutions to these problems. They're discovering new ways to think about themselves, and they are changing the ways they relate to one another for their mutual benefit.